What's up, y'all? It's Drewski, and I've teamed up with Mountain Dew to produce a hilarious new basketball podcast called The Dew Zone with Drewski. Learn the backstories of your favorite ballers and celebrities like Jamal Murray.
Did you have like a favorite team? Was it the Raptors at the time or no? Was the Raptors even started around that time?
Come on, bro.
I ain't that old, fam. You talking like I'm 50.
Taylor Rooks, Asia Wilson, and many more. You won't want to miss this. Listen to The Dew Zone with Drewski on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast.
As far as the Valley Boys go, what's the next step for that? How would you like for that to grow with Suns fans' hearts and minds here?
I mean, it's a family. Like, it's not, it's going to grow organically. I can't force it to grow. Me and DA actually came up with the name just coming back from a game one day, and it stuck. So, it's been a beautiful thing to see, man, because that's the whole city of Phoenix. Everybody, we are all Valley boys and girls. It's not just the team. You feel me? It's a community of people riding behind us at the end of the day, and we'll feel that support, and the Valley boys will continue to grow because we'll continue to get better.
Welcome to the Timeline of Phoenix Suns podcast, sponsored by Harry's Razors. Shout out to them this week. My name is Mike V. Hill, the host. Sam's here too. Hello, Sam.
Hey.
Let's get right into it.
The cheese is cold.
I wanted to start this week with a cold take of the week segment because it was just such a good week for it. Sometimes the universe decides what you should do, and this week it did. The offseason has sort of rounded out for the Phoenix Suns. We now have Kelly Oubre, Ricky Rubio, Dario Saric, Aaron Baines. You guys know all the guys. And then the articles started coming out. That's right, everyone wanting to grade the offseason. And this is more than just Ben Rohrbach. I'm going to call him out by name. That's Ben Rohrbach, who said this. It is unclear if any of the Suns' deals made them better than they would have been by standing pat, and it only cost them a recent lottery pick and 4 future picks. That's right. What he said is, it is unclear if any of the Suns' deals made them better than they would have been had they standed pat. And that includes keeping Josh Jackson, not having a point guard, not having a power forward, and just playing, I guess, like that next season with a very unhappy Devin Booker. More than Ben Rohrbach, what I wanted to do was call out these guys who lazily write about the Phoenix Suns as if they don't think it's important to take the time to actually learn about the offseason moves and actually analyze whether or not they got any better. Because what Ben Rohrbach did is he did not do that. He shied away from even analyzing it, and instead he said it's unclear. I have no idea if they got better or not. That's about as lazy as it gets. Sam, how do you feel about takes like this?
Well, they're stupid. What do you want me to say? But, with Ben Rohrbach, you're the one who destroyed him on Twitter. So I wanted to give you that chance, first of all, to just, you should be the one going after him, if anything. But yeah, these guys, they're the types, they probably still think Josh Jackson is like, well, it's always funny how the expectations change, right? Like Josh Jackson is not a worthy prospect to some writers until the Suns get rid of him. And then he's like a worthy reclamation project for some team, a diamond in the rough, just waiting to be molded to save some team because the stupid Suns let him go. In the same way that we saw some people talk about Marquise Chris after the trade with Houston that involved Brandon Knight and Ryan Anderson last summer. And we saw how that turned out for the Rockets. So, we've talked about this a lot, Mike. When you're at the bottom, people kind of want you to stay at the bottom. Unfortunately for them, I don't think the Suns are going to stay at the bottom. And we're going to talk a lot more about that with our fabulous guest later on in this episode.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of odd that they don't even take the time to actually analyze it at all. It's just, I will give them credit here. It's hard to analyze every single deal and analyze every single offseason for all 30 teams. That's a lot of work, but it is the work that they chose to do. So I think it should be said that they need to put a little more effort in it. And I will give Ben Rohrbach credit for actually responding on Twitter, because I did call him out. I said, is it really unclear that we got better? Is it that crazy that the team without a point guard now has a point guard got better? I think it's completely insane that he said that specifically. But it's not just him. There's Justin Verrier, who also wrote for The Ringer this last week and basically just panned every move the Suns made, including the Ricky Rubio signing, saying that he's overpaid and not a good fit. And I think there's something to saying maybe he's not the perfect fit for Devin Booker, but it's like they don't even acknowledge that DeAndre Ayton exists, and the fact that Ricky Rubio could potentially be the perfect fit for DeAndre Ayton. It's like that doesn't even exist to them.
They just didn't try. Let's not try to overanalyze their thinking. I think they just didn't try. It's exactly what you said at the beginning. They're lazy. They were on deadline, writing an article about 30 NBA teams. They got to the Phoenix Suns 29th or 30th and thought, fuck it, let's just finish this off and give them an F.
Yeah, exactly. An F is just a huge exaggeration to me. I think it's actually fair to criticize these deals, and I think a lot of people are not looking at the picture as a whole and trying to figure out exactly what the Suns are trying to do as far as clearing out these negative assets. And also, they never really acknowledged the idea of a sunk cost. He just acknowledged Josh Jackson by calling him a recent lottery pick. That's all he did. What he's not saying is he was the worst player in the NBA last year and had a negative value on this team, and they wanted to get rid of him so that they didn't have to pay him almost $8 million next year. He doesn't acknowledge that. He just calls him a recent lottery pick because that makes them look worse. Maybe he could have said that they traded a player who was very bad, who they shouldn't have drafted in the first place. That's a fair thing to say. They should have drafted somebody else. It's difficult to predict drafts, obviously, but criticizing GMs for that is something that's fair game. Their job is to try and predict the future as it is, and that's a difficult job to do. So what we decided to do is have Tim on. Tim is the founder of the B-Ball Index. It's a very excellent website, very excellent Twitter follow. Definitely check them out. And what we wanted to do is look at these moves using data. So we wanted to take a look at everything through that lens and try and figure out if the Suns got better, because what Ben said is it's unclear if they got better. So Tim is going to come on in just a second, and he's going to help us take a look at all these deals and all the players on the Suns and figure out exactly what it looks like through that analytic lens. Before we get to Tim, though, Kelly Oubre did officially sign. It's not exactly a lot to talk about as far as the Kelly Oubre deal. It was basically 2 years, $30 million. Do you have any thoughts on that deal before we get to Tim? Quickly, Sam.
Well, 2 years, I'm fine with the deal. I figured 15 million was probably about what it would take. I figured, getting him for maybe his market value is closer to 12 is what I was thinking, but I didn't think you could actually get him to sign for that little. It's just 2 years threw us all off. I was definitely expecting a 4-year deal. It's a gamble on the part of Kelly, but, maybe, and this is something actually interesting, we didn't go into this with Tim, but according to his data and their models, players hit their peak. It's conventional wisdom that players hit their peak around the age of 28, 29. It's not actually true, at least according to their models. Your peak is probably closer to around age 26. At least that's more so your athletic prime. Maybe you get a little bit craftier with some veteran experience in old age. I don't know. But Kelly is going to be right around that age. He's going to be 25 when he hits unrestricted free agency 2 years from now, ready to be theoretically in his prime. So it's a big gamble on his part, but, maybe it could just pay off. And if he, exceeds expectations over the next couple of years, then maybe he could get his $20-25 million a year deal 2 years from now.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good situation for the Suns. We talk about this with Tim a little bit, where he's trying to prove himself, and he really only has 2 years to prove himself. So, although next year is his contract year, he understands that this short of a deal, and even paid a pretty high amount, like $15 million is not nothing. That's starter money. He has to prove himself in order for this to be a smart move for him. Now, we talked about it, that 2021 free agency class is stacked. There's a lot of guys in that class, and Kelly Oubre will now be going up against them. We talked about the potential of him actually signing his qualifying offer and going into next season, the end of next season, as one of the better free agents available, but he didn't do that. He's more betting on himself to improve in those 2 years and come in to that offseason as one of the better players, and we'll see if that happens. I think it's good. It's a good situation for the Suns because the pressure is going to be on him going forward, and it'll be interesting to see how he develops, because there are areas of his game, as we're going to talk about soon, that need to improve in order for him to even be worth that $15 million that he's now being paid. And I agree with you, Sam. I think a little bit lower than that is likely what he would be worth. But to the Suns, it is worth more to sign him because of what he did for the culture and what he did for the guys that were playing on this team. And those are things that we talk about too. It's just really difficult to measure with the data that we're going to talk about. So what we're going to do, we're going to bring Tim on in just a second, and he's going to talk to us about how these analytics actually look at the Phoenix Suns. Now, there's a couple things I want to say before we get to Tim. And the first thing is, the first thing is, remember that this data is comparing these players to the rest of the NBA. So what we're trying to do is look at whether or not the Phoenix Suns improved from last year. At the end of the interview, we're going to talk about the players that we had and the players that are now gone and how terrible they were. And what that means, though, is the Suns are still likely going into next season, as we've talked about on Twitter, Sam and I, as a 30-win team, which still makes them one of the worst teams in the NBA. But that's a massive improvement for the Suns. So even though some of this data points at a lot of these guys as being lower ends of the NBA, they're still much better than the players that we had previously. So it still projects an improvement. So at some points during this interview, it might make you feel kind of sad thinking about what the data actually looks like for some of the players that the Suns have. But remember that it's still an improvement from what we had before. What do you want to say, Sam?
What I want to say is, guys, this is a really long interview coming up. There's going to be some things that you're going to like hearing, and there's going to be some things that you're probably not going to like hearing. But a couple of points on that. One, every data output from a statistical model comes with a certain level of confidence. No statistician ever claims to have all the answers. And outliers are always possible, both in the positive direction and in the negative direction. So just because, this is what a projection says a player is going to be, doesn't necessarily mean that's what that player is going to be. An example, and Tim will admit this to you himself, last year, B-Ball Index was very low on De'Aaron Fox. This year, B-Ball Index loves De'Aaron Fox, and he was the main reason that Sacramento had a surprising turnaround season that nobody saw coming, including these statistical models. But a second point, we brought in Tim because he tells it like it is. It would have been easy to bring in analysts who are going to tell you what you want to hear. But this is a guy where his expertise, both on the data level with what he's done for B-Ball Index, which seriously is maybe the best place to get publicly available data that, outside of the proprietary data that teams themselves have access to, this is the best that you can get as a basketball fan if you're truly interested in the statistical side of things. But beyond that, he's a guy with excellent X's and O's experience, worked at the D1 level, designed the team playbooks for NBA 2K, and you'll see he just has fantastic insight on how to optimize the X's and O's for various teams. So, hopefully you hear him out for everything he has to say, because not all of the analysis is always going to be pretty, but I think it's very, very insightful. And I think it answers a lot of the questions as to what the Suns might need to solve with their roster construction in the years going forward.
Exactly. I think I know it's optimism season, as I've talked about before. So sometimes it's hard for reality to hit you, and it can hit you kind of hard when it comes at you. But this is the truth of what the Suns are. They're not a playoff team next year, and if they are, it would be basically a statistical anomaly for them to improve that much, and that would be really fun season. Those are the most fun seasons. There's a reason that we watch the games. It's not like we could just run these data models and not watch the games. There's a reason we watch the games, and it's for stuff like that to happen. But this is the reality of what they are and what they can be, and that's still probably like a 30 to 35 win team. 35 win team being like the high end of expectations next year, and this is why the future flexibility is so important for this team. So as you listen, just keep that in mind, that we are talking about a 30-win team and how good they can be, and how important it is to have young guys that could potentially improve, young guys that we believe in. So we'll switch over to Tim right now. Once again, Tim is the founder of the B-Ball Index. Take a look at their website. Take a look at their Twitter account. Just Google it, and you can find us following it. He goes by Cranjus McBasketball online, and take a look at his tweets as well. He tweets a lot of good information. So we'll switch over to that right now. Once again, joining us is the founder of the B-Ball Index, Tim. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm excellent, guys. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on. I don't get to talk a lot of Suns basketball, but it's an interesting team. And I'm just looking through the data. There are just so many different stories you can tell and different narratives. And it's cool to see maybe the hope that's coming, some of the guys who went out the door, and then what this team might look like under Monty Williams, and how the data plays into all of that.
Yeah, I really appreciate you actually looking into this for us and joining us, of course. Thank you so much for joining us. It's interesting. The B-Ball Index is a very interesting site. Lots of information, lots of good tweets you guys have put out. Lots of Suns fans like to share those tweets, especially when they make Mikal Bridges look really good, which a lot of them did. What made you start the B-Ball Index website, and what is your background to help people understand where you come from?
So my background is I have 3 business degrees. I, in college myself, actually ran the analytics for the D1 team at my school and got my foot in the door that way. I don't traditionally have any sort of statistics degree or actuarial science or anything like that, but I have a little bit of a data background, and I broke into the Twitter world under a fake name to keep things separate from, my actual team that I'm working for, and did some writing, started my own podcast, did a bunch of different things. I created the playbooks for 2K18 for 20 of the 30 NBA teams. I just did a little bit here and there, and got to the point where I decided, hey, you know what? I have my own data model. We can pick games. We have gambling content that's actually really good. We've been able to beat Vegas for NBA, March Madness, and WNBA. I was like, I have that. I've been able to create some of this other data. Why don't I try to put that all together? I partnered with Jacob Goldstein, who's our chief analytics officer, because he also had some great data like PIPM that we'll talk about in a little bit. And he had a gambling model. So we're like, hey, let's throw this all together, create our own site, try to hire some good people, have some great data-driven content. And then because our business model isn't a normal blog, we're not making money off of ads. We're making money off of people paying, hundreds of dollars a month for gambling stuff. We can afford to pay writers well. So that's how it started. We launched in mid-October. I think it was like a day or two before the season started. And the season went really well. The gambling content held up. We're not driven by clicks. We have no ads on the website. So our success or failure is dependent on people finding our gambling models and our data valuable enough to pay their own money for. So that's been really cool. And it's been neat to see how our data has really worked its way through the landscape with coaches and teams and fans. And like Suns fans, you're one of the few teams that actually use some of our stats on your team NBA broadcast. Like on TV, your announcer's on there talking about Mikal Bridges and his 98th percentile or whatever it was, perimeter defensive grade. So that was really cool for me to see. We're now at the point where we're working with agents. Mm-hmm. We're working with college D1 teams. So we're trying to provide as good of data as we can for the public, and then also have these different things on the side, because I'm a competitor. I work for a team. I want to help win a championship, and we've got a lot of different things going on. But that's what the site is. That's where it came from, and we have a lot of really exciting things coming up by the start of next season.
So, Tim, I'm a huge fan of what you guys do, a big believer in it now, and I love going through all the spreadsheets that you offer. But I think it's fair to say, you guys have come a really, really long way from sort of last summer when you kind of got your start by posting these sort of ominous player grades on Twitter, ranking these players in various roles and assigning a grade to it. At which time, I think, a lot of people at the time, I had no introduction to B-Ball Index back then, and a lot of people still don't, kind of didn't understand what was the background behind all that. So maybe as we think about like all of the publicly available data out there these days, what kind of separates your website from some of that other data out there? What can fans really see as some special insight in the sort of data and models that you guys provide?
I'll say that your experience is the same as a lot of people's and will be the same as a lot of people going forward. It's different information. We're used to seeing, box score stats, or we have some impact stats like real plus minus at ESPN that show, when a player's on the court, how much better is the team when they're on the court. And we actually have our own stat, PIPM, player impact plus minus, that is similar in that fashion. With our talent grades, it's a little bit different. And having categories like perimeter shooting or one-on-one or interior defense, those aren't random acronyms. Those are names of skill sets that we came up with by, working with coaches, professional coaches, working with scouts, figuring out, hey, if we're going to measure 10 to 15 different things, so what would be most important? And figuring out, hey, what do we actually have the data to be able to measure? Because there are teams doing what we are doing, and we know this because we've talked to them with the better proprietary data, and they're able to come up with, 25, 30 categories. We have 11 on the site, and what makes them different is they are skill sets, and we're trying to evaluate talent, not just impact, not efficiency. We're looking at performance, and then when we go from performance to talent, we think the big difference there is context and situation. So what we will try to do is, hey, maybe your performance as a perimeter defender is this, but after we do all of our adjustments for who you're defending, not like if the team's hiding you on defense, we can capture that. If you have Rudy Gobert standing behind you and blocking a lot of shots, but you're not actually doing your job, we can capture that. Or on the offensive end, if you're on a team that has either great spacing or really bad spacing, that's something we're looking at. We have spatial tracking data that can look at that. We're looking at the difficulty of the shots that you're taking. So really, we're trying to evaluate how good players are in skill at each of these key skill sets in a neutral environment. And then from those scores, from those metrics, this is all data driven. Nobody's sitting at a desk saying you're an A and you're a C. And I think a lot of people, when they see our stuff, initially they just think that's what's happening. But it's all data driven. We have metric grades that are turned into percentiles. So you can say, hey, this person is in the 95th percentile. That means that their rating was better than 95% of the NBA. And then we convert each of those percentiles to a letter grade. This is something that I did when I ran an analytics department, and it was able to get coaches to buy onto what I was doing. Players understood it. You don't have to go through any spreadsheets. It's really simple. We all had letter grades growing up, at least in America. It's simple. It's easy to understand, and I think that should help us moving forward to contextualize information. And that's why you'll see, okay, Devin Booker had an A one-on-one grade last year, or Mikal Bridges had an A- perimeter defensive grade, or whatever it happens to be. But that's what we're trying to do, is evaluate talent, and then the way we represent it will be in those percentiles and those letter grades.
First of all, I want to just say I appreciate you acknowledging Donovan Mitchell's overrated defense there. I think you're playing to the right crowd with Suns fans. But one of the main reasons we had you on is because there's a lot of people that are giving out off-season grades. And first of all, I think off-season grades are mostly kind of weirdly subjective, because it's all based on how you feel about these guys in the draft who haven't played yet. And just there's a lot of perception that's brought into it. But what we've noticed as Suns fans is when you're at the bottom of the league, whether it be the Suns or other teams that are at the bottom of the league, a lot of people don't put a lot of effort into actually grading the offseason moves that you make, because the assumption is that it's likely inconsequential because you'll stay at the bottom of the league. So we wanted to have you on to actually break down some data on a lot of these moves that the Suns have made and see how you feel about it, or what the data says about it, more than a feeling, I guess, to quote Boston. First of all, Kelly Oubre had his press conference today, which people loved online. Kelly Oubre is a player that Suns fans love for a lot of reasons. I think he played really well once he got to Phoenix. That was the best stretch of his career so far. He brings a lot of attitude and energy to the team, something that's probably harder to measure with the data that you have. And he signed a 2-year, $30 million deal. This is the first time we're actually talking about it on this podcast, because it happened since our last episode. What does your data say about Kelly Oubre? How much do you think he's worth, and how good do you think he is?
So I will, when I talk about, or when my site evaluates, this was a good deal, or this deal had a 70% chance to return a positive ROI on the money that they paid a player. Those will be based off of our player impact plus minus valuation, and PIPM is an impact stat. So if you have a PIPM of +2, that means that when you are on the court, your team will be expected to score 2 more points than your opponent per 100 possessions. So it's like ESPN's real plus minus. One of the big differences being that our stat adjusts for luck or variance in data. So like if when I'm on the court, opponents shoot 80% from the free throw line, but when I'm off the court, they shoot 70%, I can't impact that. That's not on me, but it'll impact my raw on-off numbers. So stuff like that we'll adjust for. I'm getting off track. Our PIPM projections will say, hey, based on your impact per 100 possessions and the minutes we expect you to play, we think that your total aggregate value will be, 3 wins or -2 wins or something like that. And then we'll convert each win into a dollar amount. And based off of that, we expect Kelly Oubre over the next 2 years, so he's being paid $15 million a year, we expect him to return $18 million total dollars over those 2 full seasons. So that's not very good. Based off of that math, he would have the 14th worst deal in terms of that expected value. And again, this is based off of PIPM. Jacob Goldstein created it. You want to yell at him, yell at him. But if I were to explain a little bit more, when we look at his history in PIPM, and this will be accounting for an age growth curve as well. So as guys get older, their expected value will go down a little bit. As they're younger, it'll, the first couple of years in the league, the younger guys, the 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23-year-olds, we expect them to get better. If we look at Oubre's PIPM values, he's never had a single year on the offensive or defensive end where his impact has been above average. His offensive PIPM has risen the past 2 seasons. It used to be about a -3, then it went to a -1. It's about 0. It's a -0.3, or it was this past year. So he's starting in the right direction. There's a positive slope there. Hey, if he continues this, maybe he'll be a positive next year. Defensively, he's been pretty stable at a -1. So overall, he's somebody who our data says when he's on the court, he's not really helping the team compared to what an average player would be expected to give. And that's why he doesn't have a great rating. If you look at our player grades, he's somebody that when you compare to wings who've played at least 1,000 minutes, he has F grades for perimeter shooting and playmaking. And that doesn't do him all that well. He's in the 99th percentile when it comes to one-on-one play. So that's something to brag about. That's an A grade. He has a C- finishing, a B+ when it comes to our off-ball movement. So that's like cutting or, coming off of like pin downs or flare screens. And then he has about average defensive grades in our player talent grade metrics. So not a great player. There's a lot that you can't do with a wing that can't shoot all that well, isn't a good playmaker, and it has a little bit below average finishing, but he does have great cutting and one-on-one data, so he can be useful. You just want to make sure you put him in precisely the right role to augment the impact of those strengths and try to mitigate as many of his weaknesses as possible.
Yeah, with Oubre, I guess the question is just, you sort of went into exactly what I was going to ask about there with the player grades. How do you optimize his role in an offense where Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton are clearly the number one guys? Like, you guys have Oubre listed as his role is a secondary creator. But the word creation, I think, implies some level of playmaking. And as you just went into, Oubre has not been a playmaker for his entire career, but he also doesn't fit into the 3-and-D mold because he doesn't have the 3 aspect of it down. I think he does have some defensive upside. And I also think he's gotten a lot better as a pick and roll finisher in the past year or so. But I guess I'm kind of struggling to see, he's kind of a wonky fit with the rest of this roster. And that's why I think, some Suns fans might get upset when they hear $18 million over 2 years is, his expected value as opposed to the $30 million he's actually going to be played. But, I think it does make a lot of sense. Tim, do you have any ideas on, because I know you're an X and O's guy as well, given all the work you did for 2K, on how you might want Monty Williams to kind of get Kelly Oubre looks in this offense?
Yeah, it's a tough fit. Like you said, his role and his role listed on our site is secondary creator. That's based off of not saying, hey, this is what his role should be, but that's how he was used last year. So you can see, just like you said, there's an expected, some sort of playmaking value there for somebody in that position. And when we look at our different offensive roles, I think we have 11 of those. Playmaking is one of the top 4 in just looking at like the weighted average, each type of offensive role, and then by each of the different player grades, they're one of the top ones in playmaking usually. So this is somebody put in a position to playmake that doesn't quite have that playmaking prowess. And it's not just like he's a C, he's a D- overall. And compared to players that are wings, he's an F. I'm sure he'd be probably even lower than the 13th percentile against secondary creators. So it was a tough fit, not a great misalignment. Like you said, the 3-and-D isn't quite there. Me as a scheme guy, and this is the stuff I love. I have a little bit of a data background, but for me, working with college teams or AAU high school teams, hell, even 2K. I worked with, so creating the playbooks for 2K, but also working with 2K Pro-Am teams to design playbooks for them. Figuring out how to make the most out of somebody to jiggle around the chess pieces to create the best offense possible, something I like to do. But this is a tough fit, man. When we look at what he can bring you offensively, so there's some cutting. We've got a guy that can finish, and he has some one-on-one ability. You want to minimize the opportunity to play make for him. I'm not going to be putting him in a ton of pick and roll. I'm not going to go stand him in the corner because he doesn't shoot all that well. Overall, he's a C shooting grade versus wings with 1,000 minutes. He's an F. So it's not like he's an F overall. So he can shoot, but not a great use of him. The way I would try to get somebody like him involved would be different opportunities, maybe running off of like an Allen Iverson cut where you're cutting across around the free throw line, trying to get the ball and then turn the corner. Or off of dribble pitches where like the big man has the ball at the elbow, he's at the wing, and the big man almost kind of like dribbles into a position to hand the ball off and simultaneously be setting a screen. Trying to find different opportunities for him to get downhill without giving the defense much time to set up a contain or hedge or anything like that. That's where you need to be creative. I am not all that sure Monty Williams is one of the strongest tactical coaches, but I'd be trying to do things like that, or even just him setting screens and then cutting off of that could be valuable. He had a B plus post play grade, a B versus wings with 1,000 minutes played. So this is somebody that if you can have him be setting screens and then get a mismatch and then have him go down low, he can take advantage of that. So that's something you can look at. It might just be a mid post guy or somebody that you put on the block and run what we would call a logo screen, which is a ball screen for somebody who's already posting up, because there isn't really a chance for the defense to hedge that, or the dump off's really, really easy. So I would think he can probably make that read pretty well, or if not, if they don't hedge, he can just get to the rim. So those are some ideas floating around in my head, but it's kind of like a, David Nwaba from a couple of years ago type guy where you don't really know how to use him because you can't really use him like a guard or like a wing all that much. He's kind of like a big man, but not really a big man. And you just want to have him cutting and trying to finish at the rim.
I think this underscores how important it is for him to work on that 3-point shot, first of all, because playing off the ball especially now that Ricky Rubio is on the team, you have ball dominant guys in Ricky Rubio, Devin Booker, and then of course using the number 1 overall pick on DeAndre Ayton, you would imagine that he's going to demand the ball a lot. And I imagine that the front office will want him to have the ball a lot. So I think that shows how important it is for him to work on that shot, but also his creation. And I think a lot of people have been talking about Oubre being one of the guys that is either taken out of the game early and plays a lot with that second unit. And I think that's a lot of how you talked about using him and how his value is, a lot of it is shooting, or not shooting, but actually attacking with the ball. That would be a good role for him to be in that second unit, running a lot, being the go-to guy kind of in that second unit. And funny enough, the way you talked about using him is exactly how Igor Kokoshkov did. Lots of those Iverson screens and cuts. So it makes sense. And that was the best stretch of his career. It is kind of funny how far apart the data is from how Suns fans feel about Kelly Oubre at this point. I think there is an element of there was a stretch of games for Suns fans that we all know what I'm going to talk about now. Everyone listening, there was 12 games where the Suns went 6-6, and this is when Kelly Oubre was a starter. He averaged 19 points, and his defense was better than it had ever been in his career, to my knowledge. And I think a lot of Suns fans are holding on to that, thinking that that's going to be the likely outcome for him. And I think even Kelly Oubre is, as evidenced by this 2-year deal. It's a short deal. I think he's counting on himself to improve in a way that could show his value later on in his career. And I think for Kelly Oubre, this 2 years is good for him because he has a chance to make a lot of money. But for Suns fans, it's a great thing too, because he really only has 2 years to show that kind of improvement if he's trying to get that large contract in the future. And that means that he understands how vital it is for him to improve as well, just as he talked about in his press conference today. But let's move on to Ricky Rubio. This is another guy that just signed with the Phoenix Suns. This is one of the bigger free agent signings for the Suns in a long time. The Suns have not been very lucky with free agent signings in the past, the biggest ones being Trevor Ariza and Tyson Chandler, who didn't exactly work out very well for the Suns in the last few years. This data seems to say that Ricky Rubio is a pretty good signing for the Suns, right?
Yeah, he's one where it's not, a steal of a bargain, but he got, I think it's about 3 years, about $51 million, and we have him generating $55 million of value over that 3-year period. So just a slight excess bit of value that he'd be getting you each year. So pretty good.
Why do you think it shows Ricky Rubio so good? Is it the playmaking? Is it his defense is pretty good for his position? What do you think it shows as a positive impact for Ricky Rubio comparison to like Kelly Oubre, for example?
So that again has to do with PIPM projections. So as I pull them up, I talk about, at least in our player grades, he's an excellent perimeter defender. He rebounds pretty well. He's a very good playmaker. When we get to his impact in his PIPM, he's somebody who has consistently been a positive on the defensive end. And he's been between average offensively to, a +1, +1.5 offensive guy. So, a little bit above average, good defense. I'm sorry, a little bit above average offense, good defense. When you combine that with somebody who can, pass the ball offensively and rebound pretty well, even if he's not a great shooter, he's not, somebody you want to throw out and have isolate if the clock's running down. That's still a useful basketball player. He's got a C finishing grade, a B off-ball movement grade. So he can do a lot of different things pretty well. He has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He has 7 different C grades of the 11 categories, along with a B and 3 A's. There's some pluses, some minuses in there, but he's not somebody who's particularly weak in too many areas. And, if you can be good at a couple things and you can use those things a lot, and as a point guard, playmaking and perimeter defense are 2 things you have to do quite a bit, that's a positive player.
The defense with Rubio is interesting to me because earlier you made the call out about, just because you play with Rudy Gobert, for instance, your defense wouldn't be so good. And Rubio literally did do that last season. So talk a little bit about what makes us confident that we can kind of isolate Rubio's perimeter defense in Utah away from a player like Rudy Gobert and put him in a situation where he's now going to be playing with a much younger center behind him in DeAndre Ayton and still be confident that, he can play good perimeter defense, that he can make those reads.
It's a good question, and I think what I can point to is if you just look at Rubio's entire career, he's been a B+ career per defender. He's got B, A-, B, B+, A-, A- grades. He's been able to do that, and he's not a good interior defender, but as far as what he does on the perimeter, he does it well, and at least with our math in particular, we adjust for things like that, like what you mentioned. So I would expect that as he changes situations, the stability of that metric would remain pretty strong and we wouldn't see any sort of large drop off. Now, when you take him out of a situation like that, the optics of it may be a little bit different. There may be less times where when he does get beaten, he doesn't have that guy to cover. Hopefully Ayton gets that point, but Ayton is certainly not close to where Rudy Gobert is as an interior defender. Gobert is, I think, either number 1 or number 2 in that metric for us. So in that sense, you may see a little bit of a drop off watching the games, just because there are more opportunities where when he gets beat, it'll actually result in a basket. But his performance on its own probably shouldn't change all that much. And our metric is at least attempted to design to try to capture that sort of changing in scenario, but similar performance from the player, similar talent.
Suns fans have been talking a lot about what is the best way to optimize Ricky Rubio because in Minnesota, he tended to run a lot of pick and rolls. He was a guy that ran up and down the court. They really focused on transition. He held the ball a lot, let's just say that. But in Utah, there was a lot of sharing the ball. There was a lot of ball movement. They tried to run that beautiful basketball game that was made famous. As a guy who can focus on the X's and O's, Rubio not being a great shooter, what do you think is the best way to optimize him with Devin Booker? Now, a lot of people think Devin Booker needs to be more of a point guard, but his shooting percentages are affected dramatically by handling the ball a little too much, and I think there is an element of off-ball threat that is lost when Devin Booker holds the ball a little too much, and there's no off-ball threat with Rubio or a much more mitigated off-ball threat with Ricky Rubio. What do you think the best way to optimize Ricky Rubio in this offense would be?
So I would say if he needs the ball, give him the ball. You don't want to have him dribbling for 20 seconds, but if he has the ball in his hand for a little bit and it's while action is happening away from him, whether it be Devin Booker running off of a flare screen or an elevator or pin down or something like that, he can have the ball in his hands and you can trust him to be able to make those types of reads. I would say something like that. You can put him in pick and roll. One big thing, at least for me, one of my big points of emphasis schematically is when you have something happening on ball, I want something happening weak side as well. Because if Ricky Rubio is running pick and roll and he is able to get into the paint, but you can have help defense, shuffle over and contest, and he needs to kick out, and then you're running a scramble drill, you might end up with nothing. But if you can have Ricky Rubio running a pick and roll, get into the lane, and then weak side you have a flare screen for Devin Booker, if that help defense does still come, Devin Booker is going to be wide open. And if they do stick with Booker, that help defense won't be there, and you can make somebody like Rubio, who has a C+ finishing grade, C- finishing grade against point guards with 1,000 minutes, look more like a B+ finisher. So I think it's finding those opportunities to take someone like him who has an average skill set as a one-on-one player and as a finisher, and trying to just milk the most out of those through big picture having good scheme. If you need Booker off ball more, put Booker off ball more. If Rubio's not a threat off ball, try to keep him on ball, but try to allow your offense to still have the same amount of threat and pressure on the defense through those off ball actions. So that's something that you can do with a guy like him who can play make. Going back to Oubre, and we might talk about Frank Kaminsky in a little bit. Kaminsky's somebody that can play make from the post pretty well. I think he's really underrated in that sense. He's somebody you can get the ball to and then have Oubre run over and set a split cut flare screen for Booker, and then Oubre cuts to the rim. And if the defense switches, Oubre should be wide open. If the defense doesn't switch, you have a good chance that Devin Booker's open for three. So you can have that happening on one side of the court while Kaminsky's got the ball in the post, and on the other side of the court, Ricky Rubio setting a pin down or coming off of a flare screen or something like that. So it's finding ways not just to move the ball. I think there's a lot of emphasis on passing and having guys stand at the perimeter, but those things by themselves don't do all that much. You need to have functional spacing and pressure on the defense through action, and that's where I think Rubio's decent enough abilities finishing fit into that. And on ball, his passing ability helps him be somebody that you can run these types of plays with two different reads, because you got two different screens happening at once. And you can have him run that sort of offense.
I mean, I really like that answer in particular because I, don't have the grades on hand, but at least, I know if you just look at Basketball Reference, you just look at the shooting data on NBA.com as well. Rubio has gotten a lot better finishing at the rim over the past several years, particularly once he got to Utah. And I don't think that's the type of thing. I mean, Tim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he seems like much more of an off-ball threat now than he was in his Minnesota days, just by virtue of having that potential cutting and finishing ability, even if the three-point shot has never really evolved.
Absolutely.
Whereas a few years ago, I mean, it was really just nothing. And so it made more sense to keep the ball in his hands all the time. I think you can get a good balance between him and Booker handling it in Phoenix.
Yeah, let me throw some grades at you. 2014, 2015, he had an F finishing grade versus all players. Then it goes to a D-, a D-, a D, and then a C+. So that would indicate real growth, and it's certainly trending in the right direction. If that C+ from last year is an outlier year and he's more of a D finisher, you can do a little bit less with him. But if that C+ is real, and I mean, based on his age, based on our expected growth curves and the trajectory he's had, I'd say there's a very real chance that C+ is legitimate, and if it's not a C+, it's a C. And that's good enough. Whereas in the past, like you said, you can't throw an F finisher out there and expect him to be able to effectively run in the pick and roll, and he can't shoot all that well, and he can't finish at the rim. So that's not a good recipe. But when he can at least give you one of those things, that's somebody that you can have off ball in positions to be some sort of threat to cut. And then on ball, finishing off of screens, drives, and again, we know he's a great playmaker, so you can have the ball in his hands in that way.
All right, guys, we're back to talk about Harry's. Blue Wire is teaming up with Harry's to make sure our listeners are shaving comfortably. Go to harrys.com/bluewire to save $10 on a value trial set, which includes a 5-blade razor with a lubricating strip and trimmer blade, rich lathering shave gel, and a travel blade cover. You get all of that for just $3, shipped right to your door. Enough with the cheap razors, it's totally worth trying Harry's. Harry's has fixed shaving by combining a simple, clean design with quality and durable blades at a fair price. Harry's founders were tired of paying for razors that were overpriced and overdesigned. Harry's bought a world-class blade factory in Germany that's been making quality blades for over 95 years. Join the 10 million who've tried Harry's. Claim your trial offer by going to harrys.com/bluewire. All of Harry's blades come with a 100% quality guarantee. If you don't love your shave, let them know and they'll give you a full refund. Again, harrys.com/bluewire to redeem your razor for $3. You know, the other guys that were signed, Oubre and Rubio, are obvious starters, or likely to be obvious starters on this team. But there were other guys on the margins, I think, that we should talk about as well. Frank Kaminsky, you brought him up. Aaron Baines was also signed to the Suns, the oldest player now on the Phoenix Suns. How do you feel about those two guys, and what does the data say about those two?
So Frank isn't somebody that I would have any degree of confidence in from a defensive standpoint. And this is where being able to filter the grades is really valuable. And that's why I love, and you guys have seen us playing around in the different spreadsheets we have. You can say, okay, what does Frank look like overall? What does he look like versus, I don't know, bigs or versatile bigs or power forwards or centers, or, you know, you can take a small forward and say, hey, what would LeBron James look like compared to centers? And you can filter in different ways or with different minutes. With Kaminsky, if you compare him with bigs who've played at least 1,000 minutes, his defensive grades drop to an F, an F, and an F. I'll throw a little jab out there and say, as Suns fans, you might be used to having somebody out there who can give you a little bit of offense and not quite all that much defense. But with Frank Kaminsky, in order to justify having a defensive anchor that's just that poor, you need to have the ball in his hands a ton offensively. Because defensively, let's say, you know, the attacks are spread pretty evenly. About 20% of the time you're going to be attacked. And as a power forward or a center, that 20% is probably a little bit higher because you're part of the plays more. You're trying to defend the rim. Offensively, if you're not getting the ball 20 to 25% at least, and then providing excess value there's just no way that math adds up, and there's no way you can really be a positive player. And Frank Kaminsky, when we look at his skill set offensively, he is a good shooter. He's got a C+ grade versus bigs with 1,000 minutes. That's a B. So he's somebody you can have stand in the corner just fine. He's pretty good finishing on, you know, if you run like a flare screen or a pin in or something like that. Not where he's sprinting off of a pin down, but if you get somebody in the way and he has to move a couple feet to the side, he can collect his feet and shoot. But he's not a good finisher. He's got a D there compared to bigs. He's not somebody who's going to roll all that well. He's a D there, but he can pick and pop. He's still a very good post player as he was at Wisconsin, but he's somebody that you can give the ball to and have him play make. So I think there are more options with Kaminsky offensively because you can have him stand off in the side and shoot. You can have him stand in the post and facilitate or score. He's just not like he's not a vertical threat. He's not going to be a pick and roll guy that's going to run downhill on you. But in the short roll, he can make those quick reads. So offensively, he's fine. I like him. Just defensively, he's just so bad. So it's tough to see how that can be a positive player.
And what about Aaron Baines?
So Baines is a little bit better. Well, I won't say a little bit. He's much better defensively from defending the interior standpoint. He's got an A grade there, an A- versus bigs with 1,000 minutes. Not a good perimeter defender, but I mean that's not expected. A decent post player. He has decent shooting. He's got C+ shooting, C+ playmaking, and C roll gravity compared to bigs with 1,000 minutes. But it's another guy that isn't a good finisher. He's an F one-on-one player. He's in the 3rd percentile. So it's somebody that, I mean, you're not going to run any offense through him. You're not going to have him passing at all. He's not really good enough that you can just stick him off in the corner and feel great about it. You can do it, and he's got a good enough shooting grade, and you know that's what Boston did for several years. And he may have had a little bit of a playoff blip where he shot a lot better than he did for seasons, so that may not be expected. But offensively, he's a really tough fit. I like Kaminsky better. Defensively, though, Baines can give you some interior defense, and that's something that Kaminsky just cannot bring. So with Baines, defensively, you feel a little bit better about him. Offensively, he's either going to be in the post trying to score for himself, or probably stuck in the corner and not a whole lot else. Maybe picking and rolling.
With regard to Kaminsky, I mean, this is something Mike and I have talked about a lot. I think the reality of the Suns' bench situation, especially if Kelly Oubre is now poised to start, I think Kaminsky is going to get the ball in his hands for better or worse. Just like you said, that would maybe be his optimal role on offense. Because the Suns, they've got Tyler Johnson. He's a decent bench player, but outside of that, I don't think Cam Johnson or Ty Jerome are going to be all too ready for a major usage role as rookies. Mikal Bridges certainly can't create for himself. As you just said, Aaron Baines is not a self-creator either. So I think we might see a lot of Frank Kaminsky in an offensive role this year in Phoenix, and I'm really kind of curious to see how it plays out. We know the shooting is there. I am somewhat impressed by his playmaking. And another thing that I do like about James Jones's offense is that I think Dario Saric, who we expect to start at power forward, also has a little bit of playmaking to his game. But I'm just, not sure if Frank Kaminsky is really kind of your second option off the bench, how that's going to turn out.
I would say the best way with the names that you just named to optimize that, and actually you have a couple guys who have run this type of offense, would be throw the ball in Kaminsky's hands, let him be in the mid or low post, and then have those guys run off of screens. Or run a delay set where, Ty Jerome dribbles up the floor, passes it off to Kaminsky at the top of the key, and then you have pin downs or flare screens or whatnot. Ty Jerome coming out of Virginia, they're, I think, the second highest frequency of off-ball screens of any team in college basketball. The mover blocker offense they ran at Virginia, he was very, very good at. He understands how to read the defense and can get himself open in that way. He's not a creator in the sense that he's going to create his own shot on ball, but off ball, he can be a threat there. And if you have somebody like Baines out there setting those screens, that's fine. And then with Cam Johnson, that's another guy who at University of North Carolina, he was just an excellent 3-point shooter, unless I'm mixing up my players.
You're right.
And it's been a little while as well. Yes. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
If he's who I'm remembering this is an excellent 3-point shooter. Another guy that they would run off of a lot of screens. And UNC didn't run a lot of off-ball action, but when they did, it was for Cam Johnson. And when it was for Cam Johnson, it went in. So that pairing of those two players with Jerome and Johnson, I think fit well with a big like Kaminsky that can make some of these passes. And then worst case scenario, if Kaminsky is in the post when he's trying to facilitate, he's an A post player. And I'd rather have that than try to have Ty Jerome create something or Cam Johnson create off the dribble or Aaron Baines do anything at all.
A lot of what we've been talking about, Sam and I, lately is how much of the ceiling of this team going forward is based on DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker. I think they did not go for any stars here. What they tried to do was build a real team around Devin Booker for the first time in his career. He hasn't really had a lot of NBA caliber players around him. And it seems like going forward, this is what it's going to be. They're really buying into the idea of Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton being stars. Something that your data does is actually try to plot out the actual growth of young players. What do you feel about Devin Booker? What do you feel about specifically Booker first and his growth going forward? How good do you think Devin Booker can be?
So Booker's somebody that, as we look at his expected growth from an impact standpoint, this is the PIPM that we're talking about again. We will look at how we expect somebody to impact the game again based off of their age and those age growth curves. And then from that, we can even come up with percentages that we think, he has this percent chance to make the All-Star game or this percent chance to be All-NBA or something like that. And somebody who, when we look at that information, he has he starts off 22% chance next season of being an All-Star, and then it goes quickly to 27%, 29%, 31%. And in his age 26 season, that's about when it peaks. And then it drops back down from 31 to 29 to 27. So it's not like any sort of steep decline, but there is a modest but real chance that in a couple years he can be impactful enough that he can be an all-star caliber guy. A big part of this, and what I'll say is his offense it's already kind of there. It's just that his defense is so negative that his overall impact is mitigated quite a bit. He's a guy that I think there's a much higher chance he becomes an all-star than these data points would suggest, just because when we're picking all-stars, it's probably not going to be weighing defense as much as it should be when we're, the media is voting on people. So if he has a 31% chance, I'd say that's more like a 50, 55, 60% chance. because that means his offense is to the point where it's there. It's just the defense is that bad, and I don't think we're going to weigh the defense as much with voting as it will with the data. If we talk about specific areas he grows or he's expected to grow from a grade standpoint, it's pretty modest. This upcoming season, we expect his one-on-one grade to grow from the 92nd percentile to the 96th percentile. His finishing from the 85th percentile to the 89th percentile. And we expect him to be a bit better as a rebounder. But other than that, nothing huge, nothing drastic. He's not 19. He's not going to grow leaps and bounds. But he's still already in a very good place offensively and can do quite a bit, whether it be finishing or playmaking or attacking one-on-one or catching and shooting. So that part of it's there. What I'll say is the bad news is that defensively, and in particular with our perimeter defensive grade, we have found that with guards, it's something you either have or you don't have. There's very, very little growth seen year over year with guards when it comes to our perimeter defense, and it doesn't really matter how young you are. So from that standpoint, I would say that it would be foolish to think that he'll go from an F compared to guards with 1,000 minutes played to like a C in the next couple of years. That's unrealistic to me, and I would bet a lot of money that doesn't happen. But we'll see. We'll see. You can be optimistic. The offense is there, man. The offense is there. The reality is the offense probably won't grow a whole lot, but a lot of it's there already. It's just the defense is just such a question mark.
With the defense, I'm going to throw out an argument that I don't necessarily believe, but I know a lot of people listening to this probably do. People come up to you and they say, it doesn't matter if Devin Booker's defensive PIPM is, among the worst for guards of the league, because the Suns have had a negative culture over the past several years. They've consistently been placing Booker in blowout situations surrounded by teammates who obviously don't care. So why would he care himself? It's not really a statistical argument, but I'm curious what your rebuttal would be to that.
So that's an argument that you can see play out if you look at raw, on-off data. You can say, hey, his teammates weren't trying, or he was in a bad lineup, or this team overall was bad. The quality of teammates and the quality of opponents and almost the interactive nature of, this 4-man lineup plus Booker compared to this 4-man lineup plus whoever his backup is. Those are things that PIPM looks at. Those are things that Real Plus Minus looks at. And those are things that it'll adjust for. So him playing in a lot of garbage time or in a lot of minutes with bad players or in situations where they're down a lot of points it may, but it shouldn't have much of an impact at all on his PIPM. And I think the reality, when you look at any of his impact stats, they all align. They're all in agreement. He's not a good defender. He's a very negative defender. And when that lines up with our grade data as well, and even if you watch film, and defense is really tough to gauge, especially watching live, but watching the film on him, it doesn't scream, hey, this is just a bad situation for him. So that's what I would say. Some of the things that you covered and some of the things people might be saying are covered in the data that we're looking at. If he were to make a big jump, it would just be unprecedented. And if you look at players who have been on bad teams and bad situations, the defensive grades for us are still pretty stable. And we don't see massive jumps year to year because, you know what? The team was winning more games, so he got better. You'll still have good defenders on bad teams, bad defenders on good teams. A lot of that, when a team's winning, we'll just have our rose-colored glasses on and ignore it a little bit. Or if the team's losing, we might make excuses, but players play the way they play. And I think if you watch the film, it aligns pretty well with that.
Now, the other guy that the Suns front office is treating like a star at this point, or expecting to be a star at some point in his career, is DeAndre Ayton. Now, you specifically talked about how with guards you don't see massive jumps in defense or even big improvements in defense. You just kind of are what you are. Is that different for big men, and how do you see DeAndre Ayton growing and developing?
So he's someone that it's interesting when we talk about the growth curves. They differ each year, each age, and they will differ. And we look at it guards versus wings versus bigs. When we look at Ayton and we look at his interior defense in particular, that's still something that we expect to grow. He was in the 74th percentile overall versus all players. That's a B+ this past season. If we compare him to bigs with 1,000 minutes played, that B plus goes to a D. And I think that's probably more in line with what you would be expecting. But that 74th percentile is expected to grow to the 77th percentile next year, 80th percentile after that, and then the 82nd, 84th, 85th, and then it'll, it's slowly decelerating as the velocity goes up a little bit, and then it'll hit a peak and then go back down. So there's some modest growth expected, nothing drastic, and nothing that would make me say, hey, he was a D as an interior defender versus bigs with 1,000 minutes last season. I think he's going to be a B next year. So he's probably never going to be a defensive anchor in that respect. But he's still young, and we still expect him to grow a little bit. Offensively, I think you can have a little bit more hope. His one-on-one grade in particular for his age and his position, we expect to grow quite a bit from the 62nd percentile to the 73rd percentile. We expect him to make a lot of 3 to 4 percentile jumps in post play, rolling, rebounding, playmaking. Nothing drastic, but just some solid growth. He's a young player. He'll be getting better. I guess what he would hang his hat on moving forward would be his A finishing grade, his B post play grade, his B minus one-on-one grade that we're expecting to get better by a substantial margin, and the fact that he's already a very good rebounder.
And what about Kelly Oubre? Now, looking at Kelly, we talked a little bit about him earlier. How much do you anticipate him getting better going forward? And, obviously 2 years is not a long time, but what does the data look like for him as far as improving?
It doesn't look too encouraging. He's about at the point where I don't want to say he's peaked, but he's at the point in the curve where it's close to plateaued. And each of the skill sets hits this at different points in time, and in particular for different positions. But he's at the point where pretty much across the board, he might go a little bit here and there. But I would say that he was last year who we should expect him to be the next 2 or 3 seasons with minor differences here and there. He's in his athletic peak as he grows. I'm sure his IQ will get a little bit better and his athleticism will get a little bit worse. But he's who he is, and I wouldn't expect anything different to happen.
So then the upshot there, the other guy we haven't included yet is Mikal Bridges, and you don't need to throw out all the data if you don't have it on hand. But I do know your data likes Mikal Bridges a lot, possibly even more than Devin Booker in some instances. If there are no outliers and if these guys really grow according to how they're expected to grow based on these curves, what do you think the ceiling is for a team where, maybe Devin Booker is such a great offensive player, but doesn't really ever put the defense together, and maybe DeAndre Ayton is actually the number one option on that team or the most impactful overall player, and then you have a guy like Mikal Bridges thrown in. If no other star comes in for the outside, what does that core really grow into a few years from now?
I think you would want to look at the kind of like the archetypes of the players that you have. And in this player's peak form, based on where their strengths are now, if we expect those strengths to get better over time, and we don't expect DeAndre Ayton to suddenly become a great 3-point shooter. You've got a good roller, a good post player, good rebounder in Ayton. That is a number one option, unless you're just a dominant post player, generally isn't good news for a team if that's your number one guy. If your number one guy is Devin Booker, even your number 2 guy is Devin Booker, and he's an excellent shooter, or if he can return to that excellent shooting form, and you can have him running off of screens, and he can even handle the ball a bit, that offensively is solid. But defensively, the floor is so low that it's tough to say what the overall impact would look like. And like we said, we don't expect that to grow a whole lot. So that doesn't look great as a number 2 option or a number 1 option. And then if Bridges is your number 3 guy, I think he's somebody that, if we look at his grades and we look at the expected growth, we would expect him to be a B- perimeter shooter next year, a very, very good off-ball player off of, cutting and then running off of screens, and he's an A there. C+ one-on-one player, C+ finisher, B playmaker, and already a very, very good defender. That's somebody I can see adequately slotting into a 3 role where you're 4th best player on a team. If we just talk about, how do you compete? You want to have players in the right slots to provide the right kind of value. Bridges as your 1 or 2, that doesn't make sense. Bridges as a 3 or 4 with this kind of skill set, that's somebody who, compared to the other 3 or 4 options in the league, that's somebody that can perform and return value there. So I would say the outlook isn't incredibly bright. I think ideally you'd look to develop these players as well as you possibly can and hope that Monty Williams and his staff can really get some good player development out of these guys. I know that Williams, we actually have player development data that looks at players who have played for coaches over multiple years and how much they've grown. And for Williams, let me pull it up. He was pretty good when it came to perimeter shooting, I believe. Yeah, perimeter shooting, off-ball movement, interior defense. So perhaps that's good news for Ayton. But he was below average with developing post play and playmaking, below average one-on-one, and 15th percentile perimeter defense when we compared the growth that players saw under Williams compared to other coaches in our database. That goes back to the 2013-2014 season. So that's not good news for Booker. But if Williams can make the most out of Ayton as a interior defender, he can make the most out of Booker and Bridges as, guys running off of screens and shooting well. I don't know. I don't want to. I'm trying to find the bright side of the situation here, but it's a situation that doesn't look great if you want this team to be competing with that set of three players in those kinds of roles.
Right. Well, I think I can handle the bright side part as somebody who talks about this team all the time. I think what you're describing is a team that needs to overperform based on the players that they have currently and show out as far as developing these guys going forward, because what they've done recently is protect cap space in the future. And if you can show that these players are developing under Monty Williams, what you can do is use that cap space to help improve the team in the future. I've talked about it in the past. I think the absolute ceiling for this team would be getting at least one other guy that's better than either DeAndre Ayton or Devin Booker. That's how you compete for a championship with those two guys. You need an absolute star around them in the future. That's why I focused so much this offseason on trying to get stars instead of just building a team around Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. If you build a team around Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, what you need is a really good showing for these guys, because that cap space could matter going forward for a young team. I think that's why it's vital that they protected cap space either this coming off season with about $30 million that they can create, or even the season after when Kelly Oubre's deal is over and they can easily create around $40 million in cap space. It's vital for them to perform really well. I think it's unrealistic, as we've talked about, Sam, to expect playoffs in this next season. That's not something that we should expect, but I think expecting a team to perform a lot better than they have in the past and maybe even prove that the culture could potentially get better going forward. One season means nothing for culture. Multiple seasons, I think, is where you start to actually prove that things can change. And then that cap space could help you be flexible in the future, either with even moving some of those young guys to help create space for other players, or we've talked a lot about the Jimmy Butler trade for Philadelphia, which maybe isn't the greatest example now that he signed somewhere else, but it got him Josh Richardson, and it got him the ability to sign Al Horford. So it still worked out for them in the end. But I think those are the types of things that you hope for a young team. It takes a long time to get better, especially at the position like DeAndre Ayton plays. And even Devin Booker, there's a lot of pressure on him going forward. So I think that's the upshot for this team for a lot, for the most hopeful of Suns fans, I'll say. Now, you talked a little bit about you have some coaching data as well. It's not just player data. You talked a little bit about Monty Williams, and of course, you come from that background. What are your impressions of Monty Williams? How do you feel about him?
He was in the 80th percentile offensively and the 20th percentile defense. So defensively, his roster is underperforming. Offensively, they overperform their talent. And I will say that we only have 2 seasons of data in here because our database is the 2013-2014 season. Since that period of time, he's had time on other staffs. He's worked with the Sixers. He's maybe grown. He might be doing different things than we saw in the past. But if he does the same stuff schematically that he did that got him that optimization rating, I think it would be lower in today's NBA. Because when you look at the film from those seasons, there wasn't a lot of great spacing. A lot of that offense was tailored for Anthony Davis. And so it's tough to figure out how that would directly translate to the Suns roster. But this is one of the few instances where I say, hey, it's pretty old. It was a different era. There wasn't as much of a focus on, 3-and-D or even, getting to the 3-point line. We had bigs popping or spotting up at the 2, like inside the 3-point line. So it's a little bit of a different game. and options as to how his offense would translate. And I would expect him to be more in like the 30th to 50th percentile than the 80th percentile. But the data likes him, but I don't trust it.
Yeah, I mean, I've said in the past before, too, Monty's offense going forward is going to be a huge question mark if we're just basing it on what his offense looked like in New Orleans, because that wasn't really the modern era. The NBA has changed so much in just the past 5 years. The good news, though, I think, is that if the data is good and we're projecting forward improvement, we're not just projecting improvement based on taking Monty Williams and comparing him to an average coach. We're actually comparing him to Igor Kokoshkov last season. And again, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Igor Kokoshkov might have been the worst coach, might have been right there at the bottom among the worst coaches, plural, in both offense and defensive optimization, which would suggest actually that the Suns won 19 games last year, but maybe based on talent grades alone, you actually thought that team should have been a little bit better than they performed. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. And generally, and I'll let you guys weigh in on this. We will see big, jumps or drops in data based on if teams are tanking. We'll see, coaches who are consistently in like the 50th percentile suddenly jump to the 15th percentile for a year because they were tanking. And these ratings account for injuries, they account for trades, they account for minutes played. So it wouldn't even be like, hey, we were benching a guy and the team played worse. It would be based on the players you actually put out on the court. How did they perform? And you could see tangible differences in scheme. I don't know if that was the case with the Suns, but like you said, he bottom of the league offensively and defensively.
Yeah, I don't know that it was either. I mean, there was a little TJ Warren chicanery, I guess. I'm not sure if he needed to sit out the whole rest of the season from when he was injured, but beyond that, I don't know that there was a ton of that. There was some injuries that happened, but it sounds like if your data actually accounts for those injuries, then it should have accounted for that, I would say. And I don't think that that's beyond reality based on what we saw last season. So I think replacing one of the worst coaches is probably a good offseason to start. It's a good place to start. But we also replaced some of the worst players that we could possibly replace. And I think that's an important point to talk about before we let you go. Tim, your data did not like Dragan Bender, Josh Jackson, or Jamal Crawford very much, did it?
It did not, especially not the PIPM data. Looking at the impact of those three guys, Dragan Bender, negative 1.7, negative 3.7, negative 1.9. He had two years of impact that we would consider a bench player, and then one that was, he actually had negative wins attributed to him. He was like below replacement level, essentially. If we look at Josh Jackson, he was a negative 4, negative 3.8, and a negative 4. Negative 4 and negative 3.8. That gave him about 4 wins lost, not wins added, wins lost in those 2 years. And he's actually expected to produce $12 million worth of value over the next 7 years combined, which isn't close to the minimum contract. Yeah. So our data does not like him from his impact. I will say, so Dragan Bender, his grades are not good. He can finish well, maybe, and that's it. Lots of D's, lots of F's. With Josh Jackson, there's some hope there. He's somebody who has some B's here and there, a B plus one-on-one grade, a B playmaking grade, not a good shooter, not at all a good finisher, decent defensive grades. So there may be some hope there. There's a big differential between the impact and the talent grades. So perhaps somebody that could be optimized better, put into a better situation moving forward. But again, hasn't been a positively impactful player. And then Jamal Crawford is another guy who he used to be good. In 2013-14, he had some pretty good grades, but it quickly went downhill to the point where he has F interior and perimeter defensive grades. He had an F finishing grade. He still had a good perimeter shooting grade his last season, but not somebody I would really want out there if I'm looking for a positive impact. And based on our data, he hadn't been a positive PIPM guy since the 2012-2013 season.
That's very interesting. I think that, I should say, Sam and I have talked a lot about this where we think one of the biggest additions to this team is losing these guys because, as you talked about with Josh Jackson, he basically lost games for us throughout the year, and that's what the data points at. And I think one of the biggest additions is just no longer playing guys at that level, below replacement level, just as you talked about. So I think going forward, that's going to be a big thing for Suns fans watching. What does this team look like with NBA players, and how can you improve from there? I do want to talk about, you have some spreadsheets that we have access to that we love. Sam has been using it a lot online, and you're able to offer that to people if they want to have access to this information and this data. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything that we've talked about today, all of our player grades, being able to filter different ways by minutes, by guards, wings, bigs, or even point guard, shooting guard, small forward, and so on, by offensive roles. All of that with the player grades, all of the optimization ratings, all of the player development ratings, all of our PIPM data that goes back into like the 1950s, I think. That data goes back forever. All of that is available in our data and tools package on the site. There are 22 different spreadsheets. There's tons of stuff. You guys have seen it. You guys have played around in it. There's a lot you can do. A lot of fun stuff that you can play around with. We had our free agency tracker that tracked all of the values on every signing. There's all kinds of stuff, and we're also just constantly adding to it. I've had to retweet. I've had to I don't mean to retweet. I've had to retype and tweet new tweets explaining the package because it's changed quite a few times over the past month. But there's a ton of data in there, and it's only $5 a month. We have over 90% retention on the purchases. So I'd say that most people seem to think it's a pretty good value. And we're even at the point now where the data's not changing. The season's not happening anymore, but people still continue enjoying it, continue tweeting about it. So feel free to ask me about it if you have any questions. My pinned tweet is to a 30 tweet explanation explaining all the different parts of it, but it's only $5 a month. All that data's in there. Moving into next season, it'll continue to update. So check that out. That's on Basketball Index, $5 a month. That's our data and tools package.
Yeah, and Tim, you actually created a promo code for us, Timeline. So if you want to go on there and actually sign up, we highly recommend it. It's fun to play around in this data, and it's a lot of data that's not available other places, basically available nowhere. It's proprietary. So it's a lot of fun to take a look at some of the information that's available there. Highly recommend it if you want to go on there. Enter the promo code Timeline, and it'll give us some credit for you going over there and taking a look at it. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. Sam, do you have any other questions for Tim before we let him go?
One really important one, Tim. How many wins will the Suns get next year based on your data?
Ooh, okay. So our data, and again, this is the PIPM projections. So if you don't like this number, yell at Jacob. Give the Suns 30.3 wins and 51.7 losses next year, which would be, according to our data, dead last in the Western Conference.
Just my
Which
theory.
is an improvement.
It is an improvement. No, I mean, I don't mean to put a damper on things at all with that. I think that's actually good. For what it's worth, 538 put out their projections today, projected us at 35. You guys have us at 30.3. And yet the first Vegas over-under betting lines came out, have the Suns at 26.5. So I think that sort of just speaks to, these players have flaws. Maybe we were a little down on some players today, Devin Booker, Kelly Oubre, what have you. But the bottom line is the Suns replaced a lot of non-NBA players with NBA caliber players. And these advanced models, for one, Tim's in the first place, and Jacobs should give him credit since it's PIPM actually, have the Suns improving a lot next season, and that is good news for Suns fans.
It is good news, and it actually you didn't just replace non-NBA quality guys with NBA quality guys. You also added some good players from a draft standpoint, and we also, in that $5 data and tools package, have our college PIPM data. So you can pull up any college team since I think year 2000 and look at their data. We have a leaderboard in there, and you guys drafted a couple good college players. So if anybody wants to take a look, again, you can use the discount code Timeline. It'll give you 15% off your first month. You can check out and see exactly how good those college players are that you guys drafted.
Tim, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to follow Tim on Twitter. It's Tim_NBA. He goes by Crangus McBasketball on Twitter. Tim, once again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me. It was a lot of fun, and I think, hey, having been a Laker tanking fan, and we're finally done with that, thankfully, having those guys that you can watch grow and get better, even when the team's not winning itself, can be a lot of fun. So, embrace this time. Don't turn off the TV. Keep listening to the broadcasts that are using our stats, and try to enjoy these guys as they're getting better. And once you get over that hump, hopefully this time will be even more valuable. And as a Laker fan, having traded away all of our young players, it's a very empty feeling because that journey is gone. All of that hard work is gone. But hopefully you guys can take these young pieces and build towards that growth. And in a couple years, you guys can have me back on, and I'll tell you that you're projected at 45, 50 wins.
So what made the Suns attractive to you?
My favorite color is purple. No, honestly, man, it was James found me in DC. He gave me an opportunity, and it's just been a blessing ever since.
Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Legends, whose four-way rivalry defined one of the greatest eras in boxing history. Relive their decade of dominance in the new Showtime sports documentary, The Kings, a 4-part series premiering Sunday, June 6th, only on Showtime.